Make simple employee registration form. Create one input page index.jsp. Designed this JSP page designed by using struts tags. Use struts form tags here and create finally one success page. And we have to write one bean class. We have to write one bean class and we have to write finally one controller class to hold your input form data, index page data to hold into bean. You have to write one bean class, employee bean. Create one employee bean, and this bean, it should not be a plain bean. You need to extend it from struts classes. So how many classes they given here? To implement this bean, we have multiple classes here. The one class is ActionForm, and we have one more Dyna ActionForm, validator form, Dyna validator form, validator action form, Dyna validator action form. So by using any one of this class, you can implement your bean class. From the 6 classes you can use anything. Okay, so this employee bean class, you just go through first approach, ActionForm. Extend your bean class from ActionForm class. Extend your bean class from ActionForm. And inside this bean class, what we need to write? Let's say if your input form, if it contains 4 or 5 input parameters. If it contains 4 input parameters, that same 4 input variables we need to take here. 4 variables along with setter and getters. We need to write inside this bean. Let's say if you have your input form, if it contains 10 input parameters, then we have to create inside bean 10 input variables and along with setters and getters. And you have to write finally one controller, registration controller. And this controller you need to extend from again framework class. To implement a controller, we have here action classes. You can extend it from action class. These classes you can implement from action, or else you can go through dispatch action, lookup dispatch action, mapping dispatch action, or else you can implement it from, we have one more class, event to dispatch action. By using any one of these class, you can implement your controller class. So for implementing controller, you can go through action class. In this action class, what we have to do? We have to read this bean data and we have to send it to model part. And along with these classes, we required here one web.xml file. Inside web.xml file, we have to configure front controller class. Our front controller class name is action servlet. And to provide mapping between actual mappings, we have to provide in between input form, bean, controller. Which type of mappings required here? First, to send input data to bean, the mapping between input and bean we required. And again, to send validation errors to input, again we required mapping, bean to again input form. So here we required 2 ways mappings, input to bean, bean to input. Input to bean for what? to store input form data into bean, and to populate error messages, bean to input mappings. And one more thing, bean to controller mapping after completion of validations. If validation success, bean to controller mapping we required. And then if controller execution success, finally controller to success or failure page mappings were required. So how many mappings were required here? 4 mappings. Input to bean, bean to input, and again bean to controller, controller to success page or failure page. Okay, so that 4 mappings where I should configure, I have to create a struts XML file. In this struts XML file, that mappings I should configure. I need to configure mappings. This action servlet class we no need to write, right? Action servlet is already, it's a predefined class. Action servlet and request processor are predefined classes. Just this action servlet we should configure under web.xml file. So we no need to write it. Actually what we have to create, input pages, output pages, bean classes, controllers, and finally we have to provide mappings here. Under struts XML file, required mappings we should configure. So just first I will go through this input page. Okay, input page by using which tags we need to design? Struts tags. So how many tags we have here? To create input form, which type of tags we required? How many tags we have in HTML? Form tags. How many form tags we have? Input type text, text box tags, text area tags, radio button tags, checkboxes tags, and the drop down list. Select a tag, select with options. So for form, in simple HTML they given simple text box tags. If you require a text box to create input form, if you require a text box, if you require a text box, and if you require a password box, text box, password, and for text area, and if you require radio buttons, and if you require any checkboxes, radio buttons, if you require any checkboxes, if you require any checkboxes, and if you required any drop down list, dynamic drop down list if you required, so some drop down list if you required, select to tag, it is select to tag, right? Select to tag, and for submit buttons, we may require submit button to submit form, submit button tags we may require, buttons, and what we require, text, password, text area, radio button, check boxes, select boxes, submit buttons. Is there any other tags in HTML? For form, anything else? Form tags, only these tags we have. 3 plus 3, 6. Upload tag, nice. Upload for doing file uploads. File tag. The tag is what? File tag, right? File tag. Browse, actually it used to provide browse option. File upload. And anything else? Anything else? Form tags. Only these, right? So this type of tags, if you want to create by using struts tags, if you want to create by using struts tags, struts tags designed by using our Java tag library, by using our tag support class, they implemented these tags. Okay. So to use Java tags, which pages we have to use? To use Java tag library, is it simple HTML page is enough? To use Java tags we require JSP pages. So you have to create a JSP page. In that index.jsp page, if you require this type of fields, first you need to import a tag library here. Struts tag library you need to import taglib URI http:// struts dot org dot apache dot struts slash tags hyphen HTML and prefix with, you can use any prefix name here. You can use any prefix name here. One prefix we required. By using that prefix name, you can create your required text boxes. I mean, you can create your required form tags. But form tags we need to surround in between which tag? Form tag should between form and form tag. So you need to keep these all. I mean, if you require these text boxes or text areas, you need to keep them in between HTML colon form and HTML colon form. In between this HTML colon form and HTML colon form, you can configure your required text boxes here. Form must it requires action. Usually in case of simple HTML form tag, we used to configure form actions like dot slash and some action name, and we must need to put dot do extensions when if it is a simple form tag. But if you are going through struts HTML form tags, you don't require to put this dot slash or dot do extensions. In case if it is a simple HTML form, you must need to provide that extension and as well as the prefix name. But in case of while using struts form tag, you don't require to configure any dot slash or dot do extensions. While compiling your page, it will provide the dot slash and dot do extensions while compiling your page. So you no need to provide any dot slash or dot do extensions. And you can configure here method also. You can put post or get. You can put here post or get. And in between this form and form, you can create your required text boxes. If you required name, you can create this text box. To create a text box, you required HTML colon, you required to call HTML colon text. If you call HTML colon text, then it will provide us one text box. But whenever you try to submit this text box data, action servlet it will try to read this text box data and it will try to store it into bean. So in that bean, what is your bean property name? That property variable name you should configure here. Your bean property variable name you should configure here. So if your bean property variable name, if it is name, that name you should configure here. This one is what? Your bean property. It is your bean property. Whenever you try to submit data, this text box data it will try to store under one bean property, action servlet. So it will hold that property into which variable? Under name variable it will store. So here it is your bean property. Your bean property you need to maintain here. Bean property, your bean variable or bean property variable. Your bean property you should configure. And if you required email, same text box, HTML : text property email. One more bean property. Bean property 1, bean property 2. And if you required address, for address HTML : text area, and again one more bean property, address, bean property 3. And if you required gender kind of things, gender, here we need to use radio buttons, HTML : radio property gender, property gender, and this gender also your bean property. You need to maintain bean property. Here gender is optional, right? We can have multiple options like male and female we can have. So only one value it need to store, either male or female, one value it need to store. So that value you need to configure here, male. If we select this one, then male value it will go to your bean class. Or else you can have one more option here, HTML : radio property, same name you have to maintain here, gender and gender. Only one single bean property is enough. Why? Because while submitting this radio button, only one single value you need to select, either male or female. Value female. And if you require checkboxes, you can write a checkbox here. Checkbox fields like hobbies, HTML : checkbox property, checkbox property hobbies. Hobby value. Some required interested games, watching cricket. One more checkbox, property hobbies, value reading books. So you can have multiple checkboxes, right? So in case if you submit multiple checkboxes, how many values it need to hold into bean? Multiple values. By using same name you have to hold multiple values. How we can? In Java we can hold multiple values in the same one single reference by using like arrays. So array property we need to create. Array bean property we have to create. And if you required date kind of things, date type we don't have, right? For creating checkbox we don't have any date type. Like to create a date property window, date property text box, we don't have any particular date type, right? In HTML5 I think we have. In HTML5 we have date type. automatically it will provide calendar pop-up also, but we don't have like up to HTML, right? In struts also we don't have any date particular tag. If you require date, you can configure here by using simple text box. Now finally, to submit this form data, what we required? To submit this form data we required submit button. So for submit button, here they given HTML:submit, and the value you can configure your required value, registered.